But on the off chance that I'm wrong, and this $30 bottle is just gonna like skyrocket in value, and like it's the best thing ever, I'm gonna go buy one just to try it. And I don't think I made it more than like a tenth of the way through that bottle. What's up, guys? Welcome back to Whiskey Uncut. I'm Paul. This is James from Bourbon Sippers. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about Japanese whiskeys. So just before we get started, I want to let you know about our Patreon at Malt Mondays. We also added a new tier at $35 for virtual tasting. So if you guys would like to try some of the whiskeys that we're tasting each month, it'll be 3 to 4 samples, depending on what it is and how expensive the bottles are. And it'll be 1 to 2 ounce pours. We're going to be generous with you guys. We're not trying to stiff you on it, but we do have to make it work for us to pay shipping and all that. So that is limited to 10 people only. And we'll send those out ahead of time so that you can drink along with the podcast or watching the video. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we're just breaking out 1 or 2 sections. So if you want to listen to the full show, either head over to the podcast service of your choice, or you can support us on Patreon to see the full video episode. So what have you been up to this week, James? What have you been drinking?
Oh, that's a good question. I had a buddy over last night, and we went through my cabinet. So I remember the first couple bottles we tried, and then after that, it's a little bit fuzzy.
So today we're doing Japanese, and we tried to pick some Japanese whiskeys that you might be able to find, and a couple that you might not. So we're starting off with Hibiki Harmony, retails $70, and this is widely available everywhere. So Hibiki is one of probably the 3 preeminent Japanese whiskey producers. There's Hibiki, Yamazaki, and Nikka. And Hibiki is a blend. So Hibiki's they own multiple distilleries, and with different names that each produce spirits that are bottled on their own. But the Hibiki brand is Suntory's blend of their Japanese whiskeys. And so they're using some slightly peated whiskey in there, very small amount, some grain whiskey and some malt whiskey. So it's very similar to a Scotch blend in terms of the production method, except that the company doing the blending owns all of the distilleries that it's making.
And that's for every release, right? Whether it's the Harmony,
right,
the 12 or the 17. Those are just minimum age statements, essentially, for whatever's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not buying, as far as I've ever been aware, they're not one of the Japanese brands buying whiskey from Scotland and then calling it Japanese whiskey.
Because it's barreled in Japan.
Correct.
Right.
Which, thankfully, in the next few years, I think 2024 is the cutoff date that most of the Japanese brands are going to be adhering to the new standard of having to actually produce Japanese whiskey, not being able to just take something, put a Japanese name and label on it, and market it as Japanese whiskey.
And is there any way when you go to buy a bottle, just for people who probably aren't as familiar with this, is there any way to tell what kind of whiskey you're buying? Like, because no. I don't see it on the bottles anywhere. They don't disclose where it comes from.
Nope.
So I know Hibiki is one that's produced there. Yeah. I think Yamazaki is.
Yamazaki is also.
As well.
And so is Nikka.
Yeah, but you get a lot of those ones.
But not all of Nikka.
Oh, okay. Yeah, some of them are sourced.
Their low-end stuff is basically on Nikka's website. They've updated since that new law has been adopted. They've updated most of their whiskeys to say that it adheres to that, but not all of them, which leads us to wonder why wouldn't they just update all of them to say that they are actual Japanese whiskey? Probably because they aren't. So, but any of the ones you find in America, I think are. I think the other ones are like Japan only releases. So
okay, yeah, and some of the ones I'm assuming that you find at like big stores, like these off brands that you see, probably are not as well. But they at least adhere to that same profile where it's mostly barley and
right. Yeah, Japanese whiskey. So the guy who started Japanese whiskey actually founded the Nikka distillery, and so he studied in Japan or in Scotland back 100 years ago, and he learned how to make whiskey there and brought it back to Japan. So Japanese whiskey is always the same style as Scotch, or similar, very similar to the same style as Scotch. But just like bourbon, independent bourbon bottlers where they can have their own brand and they can name themselves a distillery, but be bottling someone else's product. They don't have to disclose that on the label. The good ones do, but not all of them do. So it's kind of the same thing for Japanese whiskey right now, but that's changing, thankfully. So how do you feel about the Harmony? What do you get on this one?
It's super, super light. Like the nose is very light and fruity. There's a little bit of floral note to it.
Mm-hmm. I get a little bit of caramel on the nose.
Yeah, maybe a little.
But it's very, very perfumey.
Yeah, and I feel like that's with Hibiki in general. Most of the time, like we're going to be trying this next to Yamazaki. Yamazaki is a much heavier, kind of bolder whiskey. Hibiki tends to be on the very light end of the profile. So if you're somebody who likes lighter whiskeys, like a lighter like profile on the palate, I think Hibiki's right up your alley. It's a bright whiskey.
Yeah, for sure. And the Harmony especially. So the Harmony was released to replace the Hibiki 12.
Which is terribly sad because the 12-year was always one of my favorites. I love 12-year.
Yeah. And this is actually the first time I've seen a bottle of Hibiki 12 with liquid in it in like 6 years.
Well, and that's probably when I got this. It's been sitting there. I've been taking kind of the slow road through this one.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to try it next to the Harmony because I've never done that before. I just remember drinking the 12 and loving it, coming back to the Harmony and being a little bit disappointed. Do we know what is in the blend of the Harmony? Like, do we have any idea what the rough age it is? Because it tastes younger to me, obviously, than what the 12 is. But I would guess 8.
Yeah, I would guess
range?
somewhere around that. Yeah. But it definitely has a harsh finish to me. I mean, for a $70 bottle that is only 43% ABV.
And that's crazy, by the way, that these have gotten that expensive.
Yes. So the Hibiki 12 was $70 when it first was around. And that was the first bottle of Japanese whiskey I ever bought. And I remember drinking probably a third of it and just thinking, man, I've never enjoyed a blended whiskey so much. And I went back to buy another one. And the guy at the store just looked at me like I was crazy. And he's like, don't you know that you can't just buy Japanese whiskey on a shelf anymore? And that was 7 years ago. Right. And that was, same thing that happened to you with Stag. You went in and got in on bourbon a year or two before the craze took off. Same thing for me on Japanese whiskey. I had just gotten into whiskey and just started exploring higher end stuff. And then it just disappeared and the prices went crazy. And so I've never been able to own a second bottle.
Well, I think the turning point really was when Yamazaki 18 won like whiskey of the year, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Jim Murray.
Yeah. And so as soon as that happened,
ruining it for everyone.
And it was a sherry cask.
Yeah. Yamazaki 18 sherry cask.
And as soon as that came out and people kind of got on to Japanese whiskey, after that, I saw things really change. All of a sudden prices went up. And of course, they started to deplete their stocks, and which is why you saw some of the age statements coming off. Now you see more and more Japanese whiskey that's non-age dated.
Yep. I think that was 2016 that it won. Yeah. And it took about a year for to get to the point where brands like Hibiki, they literally discontinued the 12-year because they didn't have any stock of it left. It might be possible to get it still in Japan, like some places floating around, but really you're looking at secondary. I don't think it's even on their website anymore.
Yeah, and last time I looked, it was ridiculous on secondary as well.
Yeah, probably in the $200, $300 range for what really should have been a $70, $80 bottle.
Yeah. And you see this over and over again, right? It's just, I think in the past 10 years, producers, whether they're in the United States or they're in Japan or wherever, they're having a hard time keeping up with the demand. And we saw this pretty clearly with here. And yeah, it seems like a blessing when when a Japanese whiskey wins whiskey of the year.
Yeah.
Like it would seem like a great thing, but it just went crazy. And we've seen it happen over and over again with releases, but
yeah,
in this case, it went to the whole profile. It wasn't just one product that became hard to get. It was the entire line of Japanese whiskeys.
Yeah. And I think part of that is the fact that it's a good thing when lesser known regions win awards or stuff like that. For instance, Kavalan in Taiwan, they won some international whiskey of the world awards and stuff. And that was the only reason when I was in Taiwan that my brother who lived there knew about them and thought to like tell me to go buy some. And I never would have found it if they hadn't won that award. So it's a two-edged sword.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I kind of wish that it would have happened with Crown. Like when he gave Whiskey of the Year to what was the Harvest Rye?
Yeah, I've got a bottle of that I bought just because I.
Oh, did you fall for that?
No.
Oh, come on.
I knew it had to be complete bullshit. Like when I read that a $30 bottle of Crown Royal was the Whiskey of the Year, it beat out 25-year-olds, all this stuff. I was just like, Jim Murray has clearly sold out. But on the off chance that I'm wrong, and this $30 bottle is just gonna like skyrocket in value, and like it's the best thing ever, I'm gonna go buy one just to try it. And I don't think I made it more than like a tenth of the way through that bottle.
And
in like 10 years.
I always looked at his ratings and were like, like I didn't really agree with a lot of his like year-end ratings.
Mm-hmm.
But when he did that one, I was like, all right, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. And since then, there's been a couple too. Like I like Henry McKenna 10-year, and I like 1792 Full Proof. But you can't tell me that those are better whiskeys than anything else that he tried that year. But I was really hoping. My point is, I was really hoping that it would happen with Crown. I wanted all the bourbon drinkers to go to Crown, buy up all the Crown that you possibly can, get off of BTAC, leave BTAC to me, because obviously he was saying that Crown was better than BTAC.
Mm-hmm.
So leave Stag to me and leave those other things and go to Crown. And they did not, but they stole all the Japanese whiskey, which annoys me because I actually really like the Japanese whiskey.
Yeah, well, so when that happened, that was back when Jim Murray was still relevant. I don't think he really is anymore.
Are you going to make him mad? And
okay. I'm coming after Jim Murray's fan base right now.
Oh, no.
Jim Murray is not relevant anymore. I say that because I haven't heard anyone talk about Jim Murray except in reference to his infamous Yamazaki announcement and the Crown Royal announcement. That's the only thing I've heard anyone talk about in years. Nobody keeps up on what his releases are. And partly it's because of his sexist scandal a couple years back. But I think it's kind of a good thing because even though he is the OG, he was like the first full-time professional whiskey writer, reviewer. I think it was pretty clear at a certain point that with the Crown Royal thing and a couple other picks that he did, that he might not have the journalistic integrity that people thought he did. So
yeah, and
I'm not slandering him. I'm just saying it
sounds a lot like slander, but that's all right.
Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, we'll let that go.
Yeah.
I think now you mainly see it pop up in discussion forums and stuff as like, can you believe what Jim Murray picked this year as his whiskey of the year?
Yeah.
And it's hard because and I get the problem of it. Like you don't want to go through this list every year and just pick George T. Stagg every single year, right? But it probably is the best whiskey of the year most years.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of vary it up, but dropping down to something like
best for bourbon.
Well, it's one of the best. Let's put it that way.
It is.
But dropping down to something like Henry McKenna, or in that case, Crown Rye, is a big step down.
Man, the nose on the 12-year is so much better than the Harmony. It's much more rich. Rounded and rich. The Harmony, like, it's a surprisingly sweet whiskey. Actually, it's almost like a little too sweet.
Comparatively, when you sit here and you smell them side by side, the Harmony smells like honey.
Yes,
like it's very honey forward. Which I wonder too if they were going for American palate a little bit more with this because of the popularity, because it is definitely sweeter. But
the thing I miss from the Harmony that I get in the 12-year, and I'll give you a second to see if you can tell that there's a different kind of cask used. Now, I don't know that these casks aren't being used in the Harmony at all, but I don't get their flavor profile in the Harmony much at all. And it's specific to Japanese whiskey. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second, but I want to give you a second to see if you can get a little bit of a different flavor between them that it's subtle.
So you're saying that there's a different different cask used
specifically with Japanese whiskeys, Mizunara.
Yeah. And that gives it to me a creamier palate. Like it's a little bit softer. And
Mizunara oak is Japanese oak. It just has a different character than American or Spanish oak. And they'll age their plum wine in it, and sometimes they'll then put the whiskey in that.
So is it always that? Because I was just assuming that when I saw Mizunara cask, that they were just using a fresh Mizunara barrel.
No,
but
it's not.
A lot of times
it's not always that, because it gives it a different fruity character that you don't really get otherwise.
And that's one that I actually wrote down. I'd love to do a tasting on too, just to kind of see what that influence of that barrel is. It's not a barrel you see very often. There's, I think the whole Kaio line is all Mizunara oak.
Yeah.
So it would be really interesting. And those to me taste creamy. It would be really interesting to go through some and taste Japanese whiskeys that are in that barrel versus ones that are not.
Yeah. And I think it's obvious when you taste these side by side that the 12 is older than the, it's noticeably drier, and you can taste the oak more in the 12 than you can in the Harmony at all.
I just like it so much better because it's not, you don't have that real heavy sweetness on the palate. It's definitely drier. There's a little bit more like earthy, leathery note to it that you're getting from the barrel. It's just a much better whiskey. And it's sad because, again, you used to be able to find this pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. Hopefully our audio is not cutting in and out too much. I heard it a couple times. I think the noise gate was a little bit off, so I fixed it. I think
technical problems.
Yeah, our producer skipped out on us today, so
we're doing this solo.
Trying to do this while drinking all this whiskey.
Well, he's missing out because these are some pretty good whiskeys we're going to be going through.
Yeah, and again, the 12 is not something you can find anymore. I wouldn't say. Here's the thing, though. I don't think that the 12 justifies the premium that people are paying secondary over the Harmony. I think they're
just paying for it because it's gone.
Right. I mean, that's just because it's rare.
Yeah. Yeah, but whenever something goes away, it just becomes crazy expensive anymore.
But I don't find that it's 3 times better. I don't know.
No, I mean, so here's the deal. The Harmony isn't really worth, I think we can agree that this is probably not worth $70.
I think it's like a $50 bottle.
Yeah, I was going to say 40 to 50 range.
But it comes in a really cool bottle, James.
That's true.
And it's really pretty.
Yeah, that's true. You get, well, especially yours because you got the
special edition
one.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that this was reasonably priced and the Harmony was $40 to $50. I would pay $70 to $80 for the Hibiki 12, and I'd feel pretty comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
As it is, no, I'm not going to pay $200 plus on secondary, but I get why people want it. I think it's a really good Japanese whiskey, and I prefer this one, I think, to the Yamazaki 12. We'll see in a second when we try them side by side. But when I've tried them in the past, I always preferred the palate on this one.